something strange is happening over China. The country, which is the fastest growing aviation market on Earth, is seeing planes disappear from its skies. Now, this isn't some sort of conspiracy. Planes aren't literally vanishing. But many Western carriers, like British Airways, Lufthansa, Air France, and many, many more, are choosing to pull service from the country. And it's not like they're abandoning obscure or unpopular routes. The missions they're ditching are typically brimming with demand. So what's going on here? Why are Western airlines pulling out of one of the world's hottest aviation markets? Let me explain. Now, when I started researching this video and started digging into why airlines are pulling out of the Chinese market, I quickly realized how complex and politically charged the issue is. Like most issues of China versus the West, it's a hot button topic, and it's not easy cutting through the noise and finding trustworthy sources. That's why I lean on Ground News, today's sponsor. Ground News is a platform that gives you a transparent way to compare news coverage from thousands of major media outlets worldwide. It shows you who's reporting on a story, how they're reporting it, and even the biases behind each source. Ground News was vital to researching this video. It pulled together dozens of articles that showed me how headlines differ across different countries and outlets. With Ground News, I could also compare the factuality ratings and only filter by articles that have high factuality sources, in order to make sure that my research stayed grounded, pun intended. Another feature I love is the ability to track who owns a news source and how that might shape a narrative. As someone who values reliable and truthful information, I can't recommend Ground News enough. If you're just as passionate about understanding the full story, then check out ground.news/Kobe to subscribe and save 40% off the Vantage plan. By doing so, you'll help support an independent platform and help me continue making videos like this. Again, that's ground.news/Kobe. Thanks so much to Ground News for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get back to it. First, let's set the scene by talking about China's breathtaking growth. Over the past few decades, the country's transformed itself into an economic powerhouse. Its GDP has jumped from $1 trillion in the early 2000s to over $18 trillion today, making it the second largest economy in the world. This incredible growth hasn't just benefited big industries, it's actually filtered down to individual households. Personal wealth in China has surged, with a burgeoning middle class that's now made up of hundreds of millions of people. With this rise in personal wealth has come a new appetite for travel. Today, China is one of the largest outbound tourism markets in the world. Millions of passengers now fly out of cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou annually. For Western airlines, this was a golden opportunity. They rushed to establish new routes between their hubs and China's economic centers. Before long, China wasn't just another area of growth. It was a critical piece of many airlines' long-term expansion strategy. But after years of building, many of these airlines are suddenly scaling back. In the past year alone, we've seen British Airways, Virgin Atlantic, Lufthansa, and LOT cancel service from their home airports to Beijing. Meanwhile, the likes of SAS and Qantas have canceled service from their hubs to Shanghai. So why have they all suddenly soured on this lucrative market? Well, it is worth noting that demand for Chinese travel hasn't fully recovered from COVID. China was slower to reopen its borders compared to the rest of the world, and its economy has shown signs of softening. These factors have undoubtedly impacted travel behavior. But even with these headwinds, let's not forget what we're dealing with here. China's a country of 1.4 billion people. Trade, tourism, and business between China and the West still generates hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Yes, economic growth is slowing, but the scale of the pullback we're seeing from airlines feels disproportionately large. Clearly, there's a bigger factor at play here, and that factor is really big. No, like it's quite literally huge. I'm talking, of course, about Russia. When the war in Ukraine began, Western airlines completely lost access to Russian airspace. This is a big deal because Russia, which by the way is the world's largest country by area, sits smack dab between Europe and Asia. And this has forced Western carriers to take some pretty wacky alternate routes. Just take Finnair's flight from Helsinki to Tokyo. Once a relatively straightforward mission, it now takes a bizarre detour over the North Pole. Or take BA, who now has to fly over Afghanistan to reach several Asian destinations. Considering that Afghan airspace is largely uncontrolled, this isn't exactly an ideal solution. But while Western airlines have been forced to take these circuitous routes, Chinese carriers can pretty much do whatever they want. You see, China is a Russian ally, and its carriers are still permitted to use its airspace. And this has given them a massive competitive edge. For example, when China Southern flies between Beijing and London, it can take the direct route over Russia, making the journey in just over 11 hours. In contrast, Virgin Atlantic must take a detour, extending its flight time to nearly 13.5 hours. This added duration has a twofold impact. One, it increases Virgin's operational costs, and two, it diminishes the passenger experience. This leaves customers with an obvious choice. Why pay more and spend more time in the air when a cheaper, faster alternative is available? So even though the Chinese market remains quite big, Western carriers have been struggling to attract passengers. And with a global aircraft and engine shortage taking hold, these airlines have realized their resources are better spent elsewhere. To make matters worse, the Chinese government is tipping the scales. Unlike Western airlines, which are often privatized and must turn a profit to survive, most Chinese carriers are owned by the government. They can afford to operate at a loss, and that's exactly what they're doing. In the past year, Chinese airlines have put additional pressure on Western airlines by slashing their prices. In some instances, cutting their fares by up to 25%. Now this strategy is clearly working. Chinese carriers saw their passenger numbers increase by 23% last year. It's really a lopsided playing field, and the Chinese government is doing whatever they can to make sure that it stays that way. Now, this might seem great for passengers. After all, they're enjoying lower fares. But this is an example of classic anti-competitive behavior that could do real harm in the long run. Have you ever noticed how Ubers have gotten really expensive lately? They used to be dirt cheap, and that was intentional. Uber, with their massive financial backing, decided that they could make a loss on every single ride. In doing so, they would attract more customers and drive older cab companies out of business. Once those cab companies were gone, they were then free to raise their prices and charge whatever they liked. A similar principle is playing out here. If Western airlines keep pulling service, it'll leave passengers with fewer options in the long run, and this lack of competition could eventually lead to higher prices. It's a lose-lose situation for all. Well, everyone except the Chinese government, of course. It's also worth noting that China has another incentive for pushing Western carriers out. COMAC. COMAC is the country's state-owned aircraft maker, and it's on a mission to disrupt the industry. It has two main objectives. One, it wants to lessen Chinese dependence on Western-built jets, and two, it wants to break the Boeing-Airbus duopoly. With foreign airlines leaving China, it gives COMAC some breathing room. Its jets are neither as reliable nor efficient as its Western rivals. But without Western airlines competing, these jets can fly on more routes and expand their operational envelope, all without competitive pressures. This will allow COMAC to refine its aircraft through real-world use, while also building more credibility with potential customers. Not only that, but we might see some Western airlines start to buy COMAC jets in an effort to curry favor with the Chinese government. A carrier that buys a COMAC plane might be able to secure better slots at Chinese airports, experience less pressure from domestic rivals, and even experience fewer regulatory hurdles. Essentially, buying COMAC jets would be a diplomatic olive branch, one that allows Western airlines to maintain a foothold in China. Of course, there are plenty of risks with this strategy, the chief among them being that COMAC is still a new player and its planes are largely unknown. Integrating their jets into a fleet that's optimized around Boeing or Airbus could be operationally difficult and expensive. And it could draw the ire of Western regulators and politicians, who might view such a move as compromising safety in exchange for market access. As such, buying COMAC jets is probably still just the last resort. For now, airlines are far more likely to explore other options to combat China. And one approach that we know they're already taking is putting pressure on their own local governments. In the US, major airlines like Delta, American, and United have been lobbying Congress to restrict the number of flights that Chinese airlines can operate to the States. In their view, if the Chinese government is going to play dirty, then the US government has no choice but to do the same. Meanwhile, European carriers are exploring a more collaborative option. Many are doubling down on partnerships with other Asian carriers in countries like Japan, Singapore, and the Philippines. By building up these alliances, they can maintain a strong presence in the region and still indirectly serve China without flying straight to the country itself. Now, these tactics seem like totally reasonable first steps, but they also risk further deepening the conflict between China and the West. Whether these measures make things better or worse is yet to be seen. So be sure to keep watchful eyes on the Chinese skies, because it seems like things are just starting to heat up. So what do you guys think? Are there other creative solutions that these airlines could take, or are they better just cutting their losses and abandoning the Chinese market? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Oh, and if you're interested in learning more about why Western airlines still refuse to buy Chinese jets like the COMAC C919, then be sure to check out this video I published a few months back. I'll be sure to leave a link to it right below that like button. Thank you so much to my patrons for helping to make this video possible. If you like what I do and want to help the channel grow, go ahead and check out this link right here. And as always, if you learned something new today, leave a like and subscribe to keep learning. And until I see you again, don't forget to look up.